Thanks everybody for showing up for today's webinar. We're going to get started here in just a minute, so if you could just hold tight while others are filing in. Thank you. All righty, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everybody, for joining today's webinar. This is the third part of our three-part webinar series on landing a supply chain job in a pandemic era. Today, we're going to cover interviewing tactics and offer negotiation. We're going to start out with a quick introduction, let you know who I am and what I do and how I help people. And then we'll get into interviewing tactics. From there, we'll cover offer negotiation, and then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. So just a quick introduction, and I'm sorry for those that have sat in on the first two webinars. I'll try to make this one short and sweet. So I am Rodney Apple, founder and president of SCM Talent Group. We are a national end-to-end supply chain recruitment company. I have personally filled over 1,000 different professional to executive level positions, have been recruiting exclusively within the supply chain space for about 2 decades now. Half that time I spent with a handful of corporations that you'll know, starting with the Home Depot. Was there about 3 years, led all of their recruitment across their logistics, warehousing distribution network, as well as their corporate office. Also built their very first supply chain department. From there, went to Coca-Cola Company, led all of the supply chain and manufacturing operations recruitment for Coke for about 7 years. And then from there, went over to Kimberly-Clark on the healthcare product side, doing supply chain recruitment, and then wrapped up my corporate career with Cummins, more on the automotive side. So I offer some pretty unique perspectives when it comes to how things work on the inside of companies in terms of their interviewing and assessment process, as well as offer structure, and also from the agency or third party perspective, helped many thousands of people advance their career within supply chain. Also serve as the career coach for APIX, now ASCM, since 2014, and write for their magazine for the professional development chapter, which is called SCM Now. If we're not connected, here's my LinkedIn handle, linkedin.com, and then you've got SCM Talent. We're also active on Twitter. We'll have this replay on our YouTube channel, so if you would like to be notified when that's active, as well as our future content that centers around supply chain professional development, please follow our channel. You can also connect with us on Facebook, where we share tips and advice for supply chain professionals. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go with interviewing first. And first and foremost, interviewing is all about being well prepared in advance of the interview. There's plenty of homework that you can do to help make yourself more successful when it relates to interviewing. So there are some very common questions that you need to be able to answer. Tell me about yourself. And what they're not looking for here is people tend to make the mistake of going back through their history, and they tend to elaborate on things that aren't quite relevant. What they're really looking for with this first question is a quick snapshot of who you are, how you'd fit into their unique culture, and what qualifies you for that position. So you want to share what makes you unique. Keep your responses relative to the company and the opportunity. Another question that's very common is, where do you see yourself in X amount of years? Sometimes, you'll hear 5 years from now. If anyone got that right 5 years ago, congratulations. I don't think anyone saw this pandemic coming, but anyway, 5 years, they're wanting to see that you have thought about your future. That means you're career driven. You've put some thought into where you want to be and how you're going to get there. If you can't answer that question, they may assume that you're just looking for, a short-term outlook or a job. If it's your first job, you want to talk about how talk about how you'd like your career to progress. If not, you want to share what you can do to move the company forward and add value. Supply chain is all about adding value. So you want to make sure you can articulate what you have done with your past employers as it relates to value. And that means, keeping it relevant and significant to the types of positions that you're applying to. Another question you'll get is, what is your greatest weakness? And this is a fantastic opportunity for you to minimize the weakness and emphasize the steps you've taken to overcome the weakness. We commonly refer to that as a lesson learned. So make sure when you do share something that, that was negative or a weakness that happened in your career, that you're able to show how you overcame it. If it is a weakness that is critical for the position, you want to make sure that you share how you overcame that weakness as well. But that could be a showstopper if you've got, let's say you don't have the right level of analytical skills. That's definitely something that you're going to want to develop. So just be careful when you're asked that question and make sure you focus on the positive and how you overcame the weakness. Oftentimes you'll get the question, why did you leave your last job? So you never want to speak negatively about a past employer or experience. I've seen people do that and they just go on, and you're going to frustrate the interviewer and they're going to be ready to conclude that interview as quickly as possible. So never get negative when it comes to a past employer. You want to talk about career progression, what you're looking for in a new opportunity, things that you're doing, like new experiences to help accelerate your career, etc. Why should we hire you? Now, this could be a tricky question. You don't want to come across as a know-it-all. You definitely don't want to have that ego or chip on your shoulder. But you want to maintain the right level of confidence. This is a great way to provide the hiring team with what you can do for them. So you want to reference past and relevant accomplishments, articulate or quantify anything of value as well. And ultimately, how you could become a valuable long-term addition to the team. Those are some basic questions, and I would definitely recommend that you practice those questions, keep your answers succinct. You don't want to have too much detail where you're focused in the weeds, and you also don't want to come across on the other side of that coin where you're too surface level and you're not diving deep enough. So always err on the side of too much detail, right in the middle, and not enough detail. So try to strike that proper balance. So I've broken this into two different phases here. So typically there will be an initial interview, and from there you'll have kind of your primary interview, and there could be multiple interviews as well. Obviously, phone interview is a very common format that they'll conduct this initial screening. Oftentimes they'll use Skype or Zoom, which is what we're using now. And then in-person interviews, and that's definitely has changed quite a bit as a result of this pandemic crisis that we're still in. So we definitely want to make sure that you gain proper expertise in the phone interview, video, as well as in person. You'll commonly find that first, initial screening interview could be with a corporate recruiter, or it could be someone in HR. Sometimes the hiring manager does it, and sometimes the hiring manager will delegate the initial screen to an employee within the department. This is especially true if it's a technical position where they want to make sure you've got the right level of technical proficiency for a certain position. So those are the common formats that you'll find. Another format is the panel interview, where you may have, instead of a one-on-one or a two-on-one interview, you could have multiple people conducting that interview. But the goals are to determine if the opportunity is a good fit for you. So you want to make sure you can convince the interviewer why you're a great fit, and ultimately advance to the next round of interviews. So that's the purpose of the initial interview. In terms of preparation, and this is the key to success, you definitely want to give yourself time to prepare. So if you get, let's say, for example, you get called and, hey, do you have time to talk now? Try to, get the basics, get the person's contact information, but you want to focus on scheduling that initial interview out, at least 24 to 48 hours, because that'll give you plenty of time to prepare. You're going to definitely, and obviously, you want to research the company as well as the interviewers. So get out on the website and look up their about information, and you definitely want to be prepared to answer some additional questions around, why do you want to work for us? What do you know about us? And so forth. Take a look at the company's history. You definitely want to get a sense for the kind of products and or services that they provide. Take a look at the mission statement and their values, because that's going to focus around the company's culture. And I would also recommend reading up on the company news. You may find that information in the media section, and if they don't have that, you can get on their social media sites such as LinkedIn and just get a sense for what kind of posts that they've been putting out recently. Take some notes here too, and especially if you find something that's on the supply chain or side of the house, if you can bring that up, it's going to show that interviewer that you're very well prepared and you know exactly what they've been up to lately. So make sure you study that information. Try to establish something too. This is another bonus tip. If you could find something in the interviewer's background that you may have something in common with, it's a great way. It's an icebreaker. You can strike that up and it's a great way to establish rapport. You want to stay very organized. Whenever you have this initial interview, whether it's on the phone or video, make sure you have a copy of the job description or that you've at least reviewed it. I like to take out a highlighter and try to find the top objectives. Usually that's listed in the beginning of the job description. Sometimes you'll find it in a position overview paragraph. Usually the responsibilities are ordered most important to least important. But try to figure out what the key deliverables are, the key objectives for that position, because if you can align your answers with that, that's definitely going to help you propel and advance to that next round of interviews. You want to also list out your accomplishments, and ideally, if you can quantify the results, percentages, dollar signs, et cetera, that's always great, because that articulates the kind of value that you've delivered for past employers. And you want to make sure that your answers closely align with the top or the key objectives for the position, the core requirements and responsibilities. So definitely take out that highlighter and put it to good use. Make sure you've got your talking points as well. And lastly, you want to make sure you've got a list of prepared questions that you can ask the interviewer. For example, can you tell me what the person in this role needs to do in order to be successful? That's one of my favorite questions, because they're going to basically tell you the keys to success for that role. And then you can shape your questions, especially your follow-up questions and answers around those keys. What are some of the top attributes of your most successful performers on the team? That's another great question that you can ask. What do you like most about the company? What are some challenges a person may face in this type of role? Make sure you keep a pen and paper out so you can take good notes during the interview. And obviously, you want to have a glass of water in case your voice gets a little parched. Eliminate distractions. We know nowadays with so many people working from home, that's not always possible to do. But make sure you turn off the TV, the radio. You got the dogs put up. Hopefully the kids are somewhere where they're not making noise. And I would also just refrain from chewing gum or eating or drinking during the conversation. Other than a sip of water is totally fine. So those are some tactics for preparing for the interview. And now I'm going to kind of get into um, what you'll need to do during the interview process and also to follow up. So you definitely want to smile and stay energized. If you smile while you're talking, it help maintain a positive tone in your voice. Try to avoid fillers such as well, actually, basically. Those don't do anything to help the interview. Make sure you've got your phone fully charged and you can take a call in an area with good reception. There's nothing more frustrating than trying to conduct an interview with someone when you can't hear or they're fading in and out. So make sure you've got a good reception there. Successfully close and determine the next steps is critical. Make sure you've got all of your questions answered on your list in the spirit of answering the most important questions, because you may run out of time. List those up at the top, but make sure you get those critical questions answered. You want to establish what the next steps are and when you should expect to hear back. Absolutely want to send a thank you email. And in that email, you want to include the following. Obviously, thanking them for the opportunity to interview can go a long way. Highlight how you plan to bring value to the organization. Express your excitement, your enthusiasm at the potential with working with this company. And I would also recommend referencing something noteworthy that went well during the interview. If you provided a great answer and you're seeing some nods, make sure you reference that, because what happens is, especially with companies that are interviewing many candidates, sometimes that they can, forget due to memory lapse. So anything you can reference during that interview can go a long way. If you feel like you had an answer that didn't go as well, or if you think there's some hesitation, this is a great opportunity for you to put in a brief plug about how you could overcome any potential concern. Now that we've covered that initial interview, now you're going to go on more of what I call the primary interview. In a pandemic crisis, we're seeing a lot of our clients are kind of skipping this phase, and they're using video. So I'm going to get into some video interviewing tips here in just a minute. But typically, most interview formats you're going to see when whether it's in person or on video, it's going to be one-on-one. Sometimes you'll have two interviewers. Usually one may be asking the questions, another person could be taking notes. If you've got a panel interview, it's usually three or more interviewers. So those are kind of the formats that you'll find during this primary interview phase. Obviously, you're going to have the hiring manager. Sometimes you may have his or her, some of the direct reports. It's very common for HR and potentially a corporate recruiter to sit in on an interview to kind of give you, an overview of the culture, what it's like to work there, answer any potential questions you might have on the culture, benefits, things like that. You could potentially have employees from other departments, especially departments that you're going to interface with. It's kind of rare that you'll find a direct report to the position that you're interviewing for, but once in a while we have seen that happen as well. So the goals of the primary interview is really determine if the opportunity is a good fit. If you feel like it's a good fit, you want that mutual feeling, obviously. The goal is to convince the interviewers why you're the best fit for the position. And if there is another round, you want to move to that round. If not, then obviously you want to try to get the job offer. And we're going to get into offer negotiation in just a minute. As you conduct the interviews, you want to definitely put more time into research, build upon what you've already learned about the company. You want to build upon like the questions that you asked during the initial interview. I would also recommend exploring sites like Glassdoor for company-specific interviewing tips. Sometimes many companies, especially large employers that do a lot of hiring, you'll find candidates will go in there and they'll share kind of the format of the interview, and sometimes they'll share some of the questions they were asked, any type of assessments. and so forth. So make sure you study that to see if you can get some additional insights into the interview process. Make sure you fully understand the job and the key objectives. The job description, unfortunately, doesn't always tell that story. So in the initial interview, you'll definitely want to make sure you ask the right questions so you can paint a more accurate picture. Review all this data that you've gathered on the job and the company to date. And you want to definitely know and practice your most, relevant, in terms of articulating your most relevant and significant accomplishments. Interviewing is all about storytelling. So you'll often get prompted in an interview situation. You'll hear that, tell me about a time when you had to do X, Y, or Z. And a great way, acronym to remember to frame the story is called the STAR format for your answer. So what that stands for is situation, task, action, and result. I've also seen it framed in some other companies as CAR. What was the challenge? What was your action? And then what was the final result? So you're going to frame up the problem, the situation. Let's say it was a project, whatever it may be, and you're going to get into how you solved the problem, how you tackled the project, and then you want to articulate what was that final result. So it's just like telling a story. It's just an easy framework. Many companies are using this in their interview process, and you definitely want to practice, ideally with a friend or colleague. Dress to impress is important. So before that interview, you want to make sure you understand what the format is as it relates to attire. When in doubt, I always recommend overdressing versus underdressing. You don't want to be tardy for the party. Plan to arrive 15 minutes early. And you always want to call if you're going to be even 1 minute late. So show up early, and if you are late, make sure you let them know. Again, we talked about supply chain being all about creating value. So make sure that you're showing them the numbers. So you want to prepare for this interview by looking at your accomplishments and seeing if you can put some kind of a number, dollar sign, percentage. Make sure you can rehearse answering these questions as well, so they come out naturally flowing. You're not going too deep, and you're not going too shallow. When you show up for interview, usually the interviewer will have a copy of your resume, but it doesn't hurt to bring a few extra copies so you can pass those out upon request. Make sure you bring in a list of questions to ask the interviewers. That is extremely critical these days. If you show up, they ask you, well, what questions do you have for us? Like, I don't have any. It kind of shows that you don't really have a whole lot of interest in that role. I recommend as it relates to a notepad, put in those, not just a list of questions, but you want to put in what I call trigger words. It's easy to get a little bit nervous in an interview, so these trigger words can help jog your memory. A reference list, any kind of letters of recommendation. For certain roles, you might be expected to bring in some examples of your work, such as a project portfolio. But most cases, you're not going to need this. But if you do have something that's highly relevant and significant to the position you're applying to, that you might want to bring it along, just make sure it's nothing confidential that could get you into trouble with your current employer or most recent employer. Always be professional. Your interview starts from the moment you arrive into the parking lot, so you want to be courteous to every single person you meet. Sometimes the way you treated the receptionist when you walk in can get back to that interview team, so make sure you keep it courteous and professional from the moment you get there until the moment you drive away. You definitely want to make a good first impression. There's plenty of studies that show hiring decisions are oftentimes made in the first few minutes. So what does that entail? You want to have a firm handshake. Avoid the dead fish handshake, and you also want to avoid the opposite, the death grip. You also want to make sure you capture their business cards as well. Body language can be just as important as your verbal communication. So you want to make sure you keep eye contact without staring them down and getting into stare-off competitions. Make sure you're using good posture. You don't want to be leaned over. You want to lean in, very attentive. Keep your arms down, keep them still. It's okay to like clasp your hands together. One thing you don't want to do is cross your arms. It could just give a kind of a signal that you're a little bit closed-minded, and so make sure you keep your arms straight and do not cross them. As you start getting towards the interview, in terms of concluding the interview, you absolutely want to finalize the next steps. Ask if there are any, ask any closing questions that you may have, as well as the timing and the next steps for a decision. One of my favorite questions to ask at the end is and this is a way to proactively address any concerns. If you're interested in the job, you definitely want to share interest and why. If you felt like there was some hesitancy, or you just didn't get a warm and fuzzy feeling with one of your answers or more, this is the perfect time to ask that question. Are there any concerns at this time that could prevent me from being the selected candidate? And that can give you another, last minute chance to try to course correct and alleviate their concerns. If you are interested, ask for the job. I can't even tell you how many times where it's come down to, two finalist candidates, and the interviewers are having a very tough time selecting which candidate, and the person that gets the offer is the one that asked for the job. So if it's something you're interested in, don't hold back. Let them know, hey, I'm very interested in this position. I'd love to have an offer and an opportunity to work with you. So maintain some enthusiasm, because sometimes that can be what pushes you above your top competitor. Obviously, extend your gratitude. You want to verbally thank every interviewer as you're wrapping up the interview. Write everything down too. As soon as you get back to your car, write everything down that you can remember, what was asked, the types of questions, especially any of those concerns. Why? Because you can use that information when you follow up. Speaking of follow up, I always recommend that you write thank you notes. Personal handwritten notes are great, but you got to be cautious about how much time it could take to get to the interviewer. So we recommend that email is best. If you know it's going to be a longer, drawn-out interview process, where there's going to be two or three multiple rounds, then you might want to err on the side of sending out a personalized thank you note. I always think they're best. It's a nice way to show that you took some time to thank the individual. But if not, send an email. And I would also change up your email. Don't send the exact same thank you email to each interviewer. Make sure you reference something unique that happened in the interviewer, and that can stand out as well. Again, this is a great way to express your interest in the job and address any potential concerns. I would also recommend, now that LinkedIn is commonplace in the business world, invite the interviewers to connect. Even if you don't get the position, they can still connect with you on LinkedIn. Also, always send out a personalized LinkedIn invitation when you do that. And even if you don't get the role, and I think this is important, I've seen this happen where you make a positive impact, just maintaining that relationship, just staying in touch every few months. Hey, I saw you posted another position. Is this something that I would be qualified for? So always leave a great impression. You never want to burn any bridges, and so forth. If you do not hear back after an interview, and this unfortunately happens from time to time, you want to make sure you follow up properly. And to do that, what I recommend is leaving a voicemail. Let's say you were supposed to hear back on a Friday, you didn't hear anything. Monday rolls around, dial your point of contact. Sometimes it's a recruiter, other times it could be the hiring manager, and just leave a simple voicemail. I like to let them know, and this is a great tactic, so you can call back. Don't put everything on them, and you can simply say, hi, this is John. I'm calling regarding the logistics analyst role that we discussed back on May the 5th. During our discussion, you indicated I should receive an update by today. I haven't heard back yet. That's why I'm following up. I'm going to try to call you back here in a few days. But if you do get a chance, please give me a call back. That way you've got an opportunity to follow up again. You're not putting everything back for them to call you. So leave your number, ideally your cell phone, and then shoot a follow-up email if you get their voicemail. A few days later, if you don't hear back, try again. I would say after a few follow-ups, if you don't hear back through voicemail and email, um, you know, it might be safe to say that there's not interest. They're moving forward with something else, with someone else. So I think 3 to 4 follow-ups, and if they don't hear back, you could probably assume that they've moved in a different direction. So as I mentioned earlier, during this pandemic, we've seen many companies have pivoted or shifted to video interviewing. So I'm just going to go through some quick tips here. You definitely want to prepare for a video interview just like you would in person. So that means get out your Skype or Zoom account, practice. Practice makes perfect. Uh, and that is the biggest takeaway when it comes to interviewing is you need to prepare and you also need to practice. You want to dress to impress during a video interview. Go ahead, and I mean from head to toe. Sometimes you may have to get up. You've got a kid that walks in. You certainly don't want to be that guy or gal where you've got a nice shirt on, but you've got some kind of pair of shorts or worse boxers when you get up. So make sure you're dressed from head to toe. Test out your technology as well. You certainly don't want to have to get on this interview. You've done all this preparation. All of a sudden, you can't hear or you can't see the individual. So just work with a friend and run some tests to make sure you can, you've got clear, your voice is clear, you can hear the other person clearly, and you can see them as well, and vice versa. When you set up the shot, as it relates to video, try to keep the camera level with your eyes. You definitely don't want it pointing down at you or worse, pointing up so people are looking right up into your nostrils. So keep it level. Make sure you got a quiet area with a neutral background. Ideally, you don't want to have like an open window or some kind of a lampshade where it's putting off too much light. Don't want to sit too close where you're staring right at them. You don't want to sit too far away either. So make sure, just like you would put a headshot, let's say for your LinkedIn profile, make sure you've got a good view of mainly of your head, obviously a good headshot. So keep it at a good distance. You want to prep for optimal eye contact is the goal. Check for glares. Sometimes you'll have a phone or a watch or glasses that can, shine. So make sure you remove any glares from the video screen, your monitor. Again, practice makes perfect. So you definitely want to keep your eyes focused in on the camera and practice with a friend or a colleague in advance of the real deal. Make sure you pay attention to how you sound and how it comes across, okay? Because in video, it can be a bit tricky. You certainly want to refrain from talking over one another. So always, make sure that you give the person the opportunity to finish their sentence before you jump in. Otherwise, either one of you won't be able to hear anything. It's okay to write out some notes on a video interview as well. Just kind of keep them brief. You certainly don't want to be reading from a script or giving that appearance. I like, again, use the term trigger words. So write a few of those down. Keep your questions short. You certainly don't want to be, looking away and pulling up a paper and back and forth. So keep it simple. You want to certainly minimize interruptions, but if they happen, just take it in stride. Every once in a while, especially with everybody or more people working from home now than ever before, things are going to happen. So just roll with the punches. It's not a big deal, and just keep going. Showing up a few minutes early. You certainly don't want to be coming in a minute or two late when your interviewers are already online. So it's ideal if you get in on a few minutes earlier. So when they show up, you can greet them. Speaking of greeting, start out with a digital handshake. Obviously, you're not going to stick your hand up to the camera, but what you do want to do is the person gets in the room, you acknowledge. Typically it's hey, thanks for taking the time. You can nod your head is kind of the way to do that. I also, sometimes will wave my hand as well. Either one of those are acceptable. Acknowledging the differences, sometimes just, you know, we know that there's a big elephant in the room when you talk about the pandemic or coronavirus or COVID-19. You don't need to hem and haw over that. But I think it's okay to kind of normalize that, hey, I wish we could meet in person, but I know this is the next best thing. Great way to kind of break the ice there. Again, maintain good posture. You don't want to sit up. You don't want to be slumped down in your chair. It just reeks of you not being that engaged. So make sure you've got your chair up, you're sitting straight up, and you're ready to go. And I think those are it for, let's see. Make sure you signal when your answers are complete. There's a way to kind of do that when you get done. Just you can also ask a question. Hey, did I provide enough information? Did you have any follow-up questions on my response? Ultimately, you want to keep it conversational, and that's the goal of video interview. Interviewing don'ts. So these are a lot of the mistakes that we pick up, from 20 some years of interviewing candidates. Again, you never want to badmouth a former employer. It can make you look bad and come off as a whiner or complainer. So always refrain from that. And it's a small world. You never know when somebody may have had an acquaintance with a person you work with or someone at your former employer. So it's best to just refrain from any bad talk. You want to also refrain from asking questions about what can you do for me. I've seen candidates come into an interview situation. Their first question, hey, what questions do you have for me? Well, how much does this job pay? How much vacation am I going to get? What are the benefits and how much do they cost? So yeah, you want to cover this stuff, but goal number one is to convince that interviewer or interviewers that you're the right person for the job. You don't want to come across as too confident or worse, cocky. Demonstrate you have the right knowledge and expertise, but you don't want to come across as a know-it-all. You also want to make sure you don't forget about your accomplishments. Again, supply chain is about adding value. You definitely want to talk about your role responsibility, but ultimately you want to be able to quantify the results of your accomplishments. When you're interviewing, try to always use I versus we. The interviewer wants to know what you did personally, not what the team did. If you keep using we, it's going to be tough to discern between what did you do versus the team that you were a part of. You don't want to show up without any questions. This reeks of just being unprepared and not interested. So always bring in a list of written questions that you can ask interviewer. That's mission critical. Don't forget to turn your phone off. I was in an interview before. We were interviewing for a marketing manager years ago, and this person's phone rang, and she, without blinking an eye, reached into her backpack, pulled out her phone, answered in front of me. Needless to say, that was the end of the interviewer. You don't want to be overly aggressive when it comes to your follow-ups either. You want to maintain patience, and you definitely don't want to stalk the person and call multiple times a day. So just, use best judgments there. And never assume you've got the job. I've seen people come into a situation where they knew they had a friend or colleague on the team. They got a glowing recommendation. So they walked in, they thought they had the best interview ever, and they didn't get the position. So never assume that just because you know somebody or you feel like you nailed it, that you got the position. Again, you want to maintain confidence and eagerness, but you don't want for that to come across as being overly confident. All right, so those are the interview tips. Now we're going to talk about offer negotiation and how to negotiate and evaluate and negotiate an offer. So when you are presented with an offer, even before you get on the interview, you want to do some basic information, right? So you want to understand your financial baseline. In other words, what is that number that you need to survive and thrive? If you settle for anything else, it could be risky from a financial perspective, and it can cause some hardships down the road. So know what your number is that you need at a bare minimum. You also want to investigate the marketplace and find out what your skills and experience are worth. If you Google the term salary surveys, you should be able to find plenty of sites that will let you put in your experience, your job title, and so forth. Glassdoor is another great place to look at for salary information as well. You also want to factor in the cost of living, especially if you're looking to relocate, because not all areas are equal. You could be in Atlanta. I lived there 14 years myself, and there's certain areas that are way more affordable than others. So make sure you're looking up the job location and the neighborhood. You're factoring commuting as well, especially if you're looking to move to a new city. So you want to analyze all of the offer details. So digest the offer letter in full, take note and write down any questions that you have. You also want to, not just look at the compensation, but look at the work. Does the job entail the kind of work that I'm really good at and that I'll enjoy doing? Is the company growing at a good rate, or is it financially stable? Are they having any hardships? Is it in an industry that may be on the decline? And especially during this pandemic, we know that there's plenty of industries that have taken a beating and a bloodbath. So, make sure you're looking at the big picture, not just that one position and the one offer. Critical that you are working for somebody that you feel like is going to be a great leader as well. Make sure you fit in with the culture. I would always recommend looking at the mission statement or the values. That kind of can key in on what it's like to work there, what the company believes in. Make sure that they don't just put up the words on the wall. Make sure that the company embraces, they walk the talk. It's so critical. Benefits are important, especially if you have a family these days. The costs seem to go up every year. So, make sure that the benefits are fair and reasonable, especially for the industry that you're applying into. You also want to take a look at the impact that this role can have on your knowledge, skills, and experience, and ultimately your marketability. What are the opportunities for career advancement? That should be a must-ask question in every interview situation, because that's what it's all about. It's not that first job you come into. Of course, you want that to be something that you're good at and you're interested in and you're going to be happy in. But you also want to be looking at the long term. That is so important when you evaluate an offer. Factor in the healthcare. It's one thing to know, the packages that are available, but you also want to factor in what does the employer pay versus what you're going to have to pick up on your end in terms of premiums and deductibles and so forth. So calculate what you're currently earning and make sure, because sometimes you can have a much higher healthcare cost, even if you get a higher base, the healthcare could be out of control. So you definitely want to take a look at that. You want to look at your short-term incentive as well as any long-term incentives. So typically, obviously, you'll have a base salary that comes with every offer. But you also want to understand, what is that short-term incentive? That's usually within a 12-month period. It could be 10%, it could be 15, it could be 20. Sometimes you can actually exceed that. So obviously you can see that it's common to have a target of 100%. Sometimes if you exceed performance expectations, you can go 125 or 150% of that target. So you definitely want to understand that. Is there some kind of a sign-on bonus and so forth? Long-term incentive, this is typically profit sharing, or you've got some kind of an equity plan. It could be stock option grants. It could be restricted stock units, performance shares. There's many types of long-term equity. It's designed to retain employees and also obviously reward them. So it's a longer duration of time that's measured, and a lot of it is on the company's performance. So you want to understand these types of incentives, when they're awarded, especially understanding that vesting schedule. when can you actually receive this compensation? Oftentimes you'll have to wait 2 or 3 years before you can actually vest or cash in on the equity. You want to study the financial performance and the outlook of the company. I know no one has a crystal ball, especially during this pandemic, but get a good sense for how the company's doing financially. Make sure it's stable. Make sure that this long-term incentive is actually something that's going to come to fruition, and that's always not in your control. Obviously, this pandemic is taking a beating on the stock market, and a lot of that of companies' portfolio as well as their incentive plans have gone down. But what goes down goes back up. So just keep that in mind. I also look at the company's reputation out on Yelp or Glassdoor. Pretty good resources, but just take it with a grain of salt. Most people that do file some kind of review, if they've been disgruntled, they may be more inclined to write that review. So just know that you take those with a grain of salt. You want to take a spreadsheet like Excel and try to calculate your earnings potential, put in the cash compensation variables. You want to factor in those benefit costs that we just talked about, the short and long-term incentives. If you've got any kind of special perk, like you've got some additional vacation, surely that's worth something to you, your holidays, etc. And I would recommend you prioritize by what's most important to you. Some people, especially as they get further along in their career, paid time off is more important than getting 15-20% increase every time they make a move. So you want to kind of prioritize these variables based on what's important to you for maintaining your livelihood and so forth. It's not always about the cash. And then from there, you use these different variables to make a decision whether you accept the offer, whether you decline the offer, or whether you negotiate. Should you need to negotiate, this goes back to everything we've talked about earlier. It all comes down to being well prepared. So be ready to justify the value if you're looking to negotiate an increase. Employers want to know, what can you do to help justify this increase that you're asking for? You don't want to get emotional. You want to maintain a very positive attitude. You also want to have a plan B, C, D, E, and so forth. So sure, salary is something that's very commonly negotiated. If you cannot get the salary you need, potentially, what else could you negotiate? There's all kinds of things that you can negotiate beyond salary. For example, let's say they, for whatever reason, they can't meet your needs with salary or a sign-on bonus. Ask them, well, would you be willing to do a compensation review in 6 months, or maybe it's 12 months? And then what do I need to accomplish in order to receive that increase? So you can, and ideally you want to get that in writing. What if you've got multiple job offers in hand? Well, ultimately, and many people make the mistake, it's not always about who has the highest offer. It's oftentimes about which, if you really want to grow your income and have a rewarding career, you have to factor in the growth opportunity. That should be something that you should always look at, not the first year, the second year, but where could my career go with this company? And honestly, I'm going to side, looking at 3 different offers, I'm going to look at that company that's a good fit. I like the work, even if it's a little bit lower compensation. If I feel like I can move up quicker, that's the company you might want to go with. Again, if they say no, always have that plan B, C. It could be additional week of vacation. Again, have a salary review in 6 months versus 12 months. And know when to say no yourself. If you feel like you're getting lowballed, you're just not, feeling good about this, make sure you're prepared to say no as well. When it comes to negotiation dues, we're going to get into do's and don'ts. Make sure you research the average salary ranges for the job. You want to research the company to determine the opportunity for career growth. Look at their reputation, and also look at their financials. Especially if they're a public company, that'll be on the website. If it's a private company, you're going to have to ask some questions Some companies keep that information close to the chest, so you may not be able to get all the details you're needing, but you definitely want to make sure that they are stable. I would recommend, when you're asked about, compensation, and a lot of employers are kind of moving. The trend is now, they're not so much asking you, and in some cities, in some states, it's illegal to ask that question. But try to withhold the information as long as possible, because the first person that gives an answer is usually going to be in the best chair from a negotiation perspective. You want to ensure that the compensation is fair and it's within your desired range. You also want to keep an open mind, though, when evaluating an offer. Again, it's not always about the base salary. It could be a much sweeter upside when you look at other things such as those long-term or short-term bonus incentives. You definitely want to be aware of your strengths, your accomplishments, and be able to demonstrate the value, especially when you're in an offer negotiation phase. Be open-minded about the offer and always maintain professional attitude when negotiating. Be realistic in your expectations. You can't go in and say, well, I just got my MBA, I'm now worth $30,000 more. You have to be realistic. Education doesn't always equate to a ridiculous jump in pay. So maintain realistic expectations. Again, you want to factor in other aspects of the offer, not just the base salary. You always want to thank the employer when the offer is made, even if it's, if it's not exciting, it doesn't get you jumping up and down, you still want to maintain a positive attitude. And again, always try to negotiate other components besides the base salary: shorter review period, sign-on bonus, additional week of PTO, additional work from home dates, whatever it may be. You want to aim high, but keep it realistic. When you're stating your salary range, it's always easier to come back down. It's tough, though, when you start out with something low. You're not going to be able to talk your way back up. Be honest when it comes to your current compensation. People do background checks, and sometimes those numbers can come back. And if you inflate your numbers, it can come back to haunt you. And if you do decide to decline the offer, I always recommend just to not, keep a positive relationship with the employer. Contact them verbally, explain your reasoning why. And, if it's a relationship you want to maintain, then try to maintain that relationship. Negotiation, don't negotiate right after the offer is made. Time is something that you want to factor in. So let the employer know, I need to think about this. Let me think about this and go through my pros and cons. I'm very interested in the opportunity, and I will get back to you by X date. Usually try to keep it within a few days. Don't accept an offer strictly for the money. I've seen people that made that mistake. They felt like, oh, I like these people better. This is a better opportunity, but look at this salary. And they get in there and they hate the job or they hate the company. They have to leave within a short time frame. It puts a little bit of a blip on their resume. They may have to take a step back. So don't just go with who's the highest salary. Make sure they fit all the other attributes that you're looking for. Never get into a bidding war. You certainly don't want to go back and say, well, this company offered me 85, you're at 84. Can I get 86? Can I get 87? You don't want to get into that bidding war. Never accept an offer without seeing everything in writing. You want to definitely see all the terms. You want to read the fine print. I've seen employers put some sneaky things into offer letters. So you don't want to sign your life away with some crazy non-compete that's too restrictive. So make sure you read the fine print. Make sure that you submit your resignation after you've been cleared to start. Typically that involves clearing a background check or a drug test. I've seen people say, I'm not worried about it. I'm going to go ahead and quit. And then something comes back and the offer is reneged, rescinded, and they're out of a job. Never inflate your current earnings just to get a higher salary. I've seen that come back to bite people. You never want to get overly aggressive when you're negotiating salary. Never accept the first offer that comes along unless it's something that's you're comfortable with. It's a great job, great company, great opportunity for growth. You never want to act too eager to accept, even if the offer was more than you expected. And never let the employer rush you into making a decision. I've seen employers say, all right, I need to have your answer by, within 10 hours by tomorrow morning. Make sure you got plenty of time to do proper research and due diligence on your end. That's just as important. Quick word about counteroffers, and then we're going to get into Q&A. So understand the employer's perspective. If you get into a situation where you let your employer know I'm going to be taking another position, you start putting in your notice, know that counteroffers happen. I've seen some of them be successful. Most of them don't. So just know that recruiting, their perspective oftentimes involves looking at, oh man, the time and money it takes to find a replacement. What are we going to do? They're going to be questioning your loyalty. And that could come back to haunt you if you're up for promotion down the road. Oftentimes they're looking at it from the vantage point of, hey, this is going to put us in a bind. We've got to make sure we keep this person. So always ask yourself, is my company just biding their time? Are they keeping me here until they can find a replacement? Have I lost their trust? Am I going to be able to get that back? Is this gonna like potentially decrease my ability to move upward in the company? Is it going to have a negative impact? Am I going to burn a bridge? Keep those things in mind as you factor in. If you do get some kind of a counteroffer, always make sure you get it in writing and make sure you feel good about it. You've had a good conversation with your boss. Any kind of issues that you had in the past, hopefully you're able to put to bed. All right, quick takeaways. Just know that every time you change jobs, it's going to have an impact on your life or livelihood. So this is why it's so important to fully evaluate the offer. Don't make any jump into any rash decisions. Make sure you're doing the proper amount of research and preparation. Make sure you're factoring in the long term versus just that short term bump in compensation. Looking at internal promotions, you don't want to get a history of, well, how quick does it take typically on average for people to move up in the company? Because oftentimes internal promotions can be a greater way to advance your compensation than changing jobs frequently just for more money in the short term. Again, never accept a job because of salary only. Make sure you evaluate all the other factors. Always keep an open mind and a positive attitude. You never want to get negative with someone. And then know too that sometimes you might want to consider making a small step backwards. If you get in with a high growth company, maybe you take a small step back in terms of your responsibilities or pay. Sometimes that can be a giant leap forward. All right, so we got a few minutes for Q&A. I'm going to get up here just one second. And just know we have been recording this webinar, and we will have it out on our YouTube channel probably by the end of the week. If you want to get notified, just go to our channel. It's SEM Talent. You can subscribe, and then you'll get notified when the replay is available, as well as new content that we put out on our YouTube channel. All right, Q&A. Let's take a look here. First question, do you think it's worthwhile to invest in a high definition or HD webcam for video interviews? It really depends on the quality. Nowadays, modern laptops, they don't come with 1080 HD, but I don't even think my camera that I'm on now has full HD. So nowadays, those are pretty cheap though. You could probably pick up one for 30, 40 bucks. So if it makes sense, you're not really happy with your appearance, then you should definitely take a look into that. Better safe than sorry is my motto. Second question here, is there ever an appropriate way to bring up compensation during an interview? It is appropriate to bring it up, and you want to address that sooner than later. You just don't want to get into when you're in that initial screening. The job is to convince the interviewer, and vice versa. You're both trying to figure out, hey, does it make sense for us to move forward to the next round, right? But during that first call, you should definitely, towards the end, bring up compensation, because you don't want to get into a situation. I mean, usually the employer is going to bring it up. What kind of range are you looking for? So, again, you want to aim a bit high, but I like to communicate in ranges and not an exact number. I need $82,576. You could better yet would say, I'm looking for something. I like to use terms like mid to upper 80s is where I'd like to be. But you definitely want to bring that up, uh, and ideally wait for the employer to bring it up. But if you get to the end of once brought up compensation, they want to fly you in for a round of interviews. Don't do that until you address the compensation. All right, next question. When asked, could you tell the interviews what you made in your previous jobs? Sometimes I'm afraid my previous salary might be too high or too low for what they're prepared to offer, particularly prior to landing the first interview. I don't want to get disqualified prematurely. That's a great question. I think it goes back to the point I just made. You certainly want to, uh, um, again, know your minimum number when it comes to the range, but you also don't want to sell yourself too short. So I like to communicate in ranges. I always recommend that versus a hard number. If an employer keeps egging you on, like, well, what's the exact number you need to be at? Then I think then you go back and say, well, I can't really answer that question. I need to understand your short term, your long term incentives, et cetera. If they're asking you what you made in your most recent position in terms of salary, oftentimes that's illegal to ask these days. So know your rights based on where you live. And only you can make that answer, though, if you want to answer that question or not. Again, I like to communicate in broader terms, such as, well, my total package consisted of a base. I had a short-term incentive, a long-term incentive. All in, that package could vary between X and Y. That gives you some wiggle room there where you're not pinning yourself down to one exact number. All right, running over a couple minutes, but let's go with one more question and then we'll wrap up for today. How do you know the maximum limit of compensation the employer has for a position? You're probably not going to be able to get that level of detail, and the reason why is because companies tend to keep the purse strings, if you will, private. They don't communicate the exact ranges. Don't have time to get into how that works because compensation practices vary from company to company. And they're rarely going to communicate, what the top end is. So usually you'll see companies work within the range. So you got your minimum and you got your maximum. Companies tend to bring people in between, 25% of the range up to 75%. We certainly don't want to, if you think about it, if you bring everybody in at 75 to 100% of the range, people are going to be on the top end and your payroll costs are going to go through probably over budget. So that's a reason why companies rarely communicate the top end, and there's really no way to know unless they release that information. So that concludes today's webinar and our 3-part webinar series. We hope you have enjoyed this webinar series as well and pick up on some benefits, some new knowledge. As a reminder, the replay will be out on our YouTube channel, SEM Talent. If you would like to replay, just go there. It'll be up in a few days. And we thank you so much again for joining. And we wish you the best of luck. We hopefully can continue to make some positive strides through this pandemic. But in the meantime, know that we're going to be cranking out new content, scmtalent.com, under advice. Stay tuned, and we wish that you stay safe and healthy. Thanks again for attending.